Hello and welcome to the Ham and Rem show here on Hamdard Speaks. Today we unpack one of the most sensitive and strategically important issues in South Asia, the worsening relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan. From historical friction around the Durand Line to intelligence operations, military and trade disruptions, and the recent mass deportation of Afghan refugees, the two neighbors once again find themselves at a critical crossroads. Afghan refugees are being returned to Afghanistan in large numbers after a sweeping repatriation policy by Pakistan. As of October 2025, roughly 1.48 million Afghan nationals have been repatriated under the government's repatriation plan, including many who held long standing refugee registration cards. The returns follow closure of dozens of refugee camps and strict enforcement of expired registration card deadlines. But the mass return is unfolding amid a sharp escalation in cross border tensions. Clashes in October triggered border closures and suspensions of repatriation, and only after a ceasefire was brokered were returns resumed. The volatile security environment has added urgency. Right now, the relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan is at a crossroads. What began as a decades of shared culture, kinship, and history has turned into a tense and fragile standoff, and the consequences are being felt on both sides of the border. In early 2025, Pakistan carried out airstrikes inside Afghanistan, targeting militant hideouts. What followed was the worst cross border violence in years: deadly clashes, civilian casualties, and widespread fear among border communities on both sides. Since then, both sides have agreed to a ceasefire brokered by international mediators in Doha, Istanbul, and Saudi Arabia. But despite diplomatic efforts, deep distrust remains, and recent talks in Riyadh have fallen through. The talks in Saudi Arabia last weekend were the latest in a series of meetings hosted by Qatar, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia aimed at cooling tensions following deadly border clashes. This isn't just politics or military strategy, it affects families with cross border roots, traders, refugees, and ordinary people whose lives depend on regional stability. The question is, can peace return before tensions spiral again, engulfing the entire region? To help us make sense of this complicated situation, we are joined by Afghan political expert Hamdullah Hamdard, a respected voice in regional affairs. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Remshay. It's always good to be back. Let me begin with clarity. Afghanistan and Pakistan are neighbors by geography, but their relationship has been shaped by decades of mistrust, interference, and unequal expectations. Since 1947, Pakistan has viewed Afghanistan not as an independent state with its own interests, but as a strategic buffer. Islamabad's deep involvement in Afghan politics, militant groups, and internal affairs created long-term structural damage to trust. And despite this, Afghans have never blamed the Pakistani people. We have cultural ties, personal friendships, and long histories of interactions. But one point must be clear. The Afghan state and Afghan nation have never recognized the Durand Line as an international border. This is a legal historical possession, not hostility. Saudi ceasefire talks. These negotiations failed because Pakistan made demands that no sovereign state could logically accept. Number one, Islamabad asked the Afghan Taliban to relocate all TTP fighters into Afghanistan. This was unrealistic, and no government willingly imports insurgents into its territory. Two, Pakistan insisted that Afghan religious scholars issue a fatwa declaring war inside Pakistan as haram. But for decades, Pakistan itself issued fatwas about Afghanistan through institutions influenced by the military establishment in Pakistan. Today, those scholars lack credibility. Religious legitimacy cannot be manufactured. Pakistan's security is Pakistan's responsibility. Militants claiming jihad inside Pakistan reflect internal ideological, political, and governance problems, not Afghan policy. At the same time, we Afghans acknowledge Pakistan's generosity. Hosting millions of refugees for decades is not forgotten, but sudden deportations create humanitarian suffering and weaken bilateral goodwill. This region desperately need peace, economic cooperation, and stability. Today's conversation is not about emotional blame. It is about identifying the real political insecurity causes so that the future can be better than the past.
So, Hamdard, why do you think relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan have worsened now?
Well, relations have deteriorated because unresolved historical tensions have collided with new political realities. Historically, Pakistan's involvement in Afghanistan, from supporting Mujahideen factions to backing the Taliban, created deep structural mistrust. And today, Pakistan faces the blowback of its own policies, especially the rise of TTP, which Islamabad wants Kabul to control as if they were a proxy. Additionally, Afghans do not recognize the Durand line as an international border. This legal dispute affects everything: trade, movement, security, and diplomacy. Pakistan expected influence over Kabul after 2021, but the Taliban now act independently. This loss of leverage is a major reason for Pakistan's frustration. Meanwhile, Afghanistan feels unfairly blamed for Pakistan's internal security failures. These conflicting expectations are the root of the crisis.
You've said Pakistan faces blowback of its own policies. Does this worsening relationship have anything to do with the 27th Amendment in Pakistan?
Yes, partly the 27th Amendment discussion reflects Pakistan's internal political shifts, especially around defining national security frameworks and citizenship. Whenever Pakistan debates constitutional changes that affect its security posture, Afghanistan becomes part of the narrative, often unfairly. Politicians, institutions, and media circles in Pakistan sometimes externalize domestic challenges by pointing toward Afghanistan. This makes relations even more fragile.
What is the sentiment of the Taliban government around Pakistan today?
The relationship is transactional and tense. The Taliban feel Pakistan treats them as extensions of its security policy, not as independent rulers. They accuse Pakistan of violating Afghan sovereignty, especially with airstrikes and pressure over TTP. They also believe Islamabad is using visas, trade routes, and refugee returns as political tools. The Taliban leadership now feels more comfortable with regional actors, China, Iran, Russia, Turkey, Qatar, than with Pakistan. So the sentiment is we are no longer under your influence, treat us as equals.
In my previous question, I said the Taliban government, while we say that the Taliban aren't legitimate rulers of Afghanistan, but they are representing Afghanistan right now. Does this mean that the region is gradually accepting them?
Well, the region has not formally recognized them, but practically, yes. Regional states deal with whoever controls Kabul. Recognition and engagement are two different things. Countries engage with the Taliban because Afghanistan is geographically central, and stability affects regional trade and security, and humanitarian crises worsen if no one talks to Kabul. So, no, there is no formal acceptance, but there is functional engagement because ignoring Afghanistan is impossible.
Now we've seen that the regional partners have stepped in to mediate. What stakes do Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar have in this escalation of tensions between the two countries?
These countries are motivated by different factors. For example, Turkey wants strategic influence in Central Asia and sees Afghanistan as a gateway. Saudi Arabia wants to rebuild its religious and diplomatic leadership in the Muslim world and sees Afghanistan Pakistan's stability as essential to counter extremism. And Qatar already hosted the Taliban's political office and has diplomatic credibility. It wants to maintain that role. These three countries fear that instability between Afghanistan and Pakistan will spill into regional economies, energy routes, and security frameworks. So, mediation is in their strategic interest.
We've talked about security frameworks, we've talked about the regional dynamics, but we've seen that the US response has been very lukewarm. Why do you think that is?
The US is cautious because it has shifted focus toward China, Russia, and the Indo-Pacific. Afghanistan and Pakistan tensions no longer top Washington's priority list. Also, after the messy 2021 withdrawal, the US prefers limited involvement. They rely on regional actors to manage the situation.
So, aside from containing terrorism, what strategic interests does the US still have in this particular region?
I believe the US has three long-term interests. Number one, monitoring China's Belt and Road Initiative, especially CPAC. Two would be preventing Russia and Iran from strengthening regional blocs. And the third would be maintaining intelligence access to counter-terrorism. For all of this, Afghanistan remains geographically important and Pakistan remains a logistical route. But Washington is avoiding public involvement to avoid political controversy.
We've talked about the security framework, we've talked about the regional dynamics. Now, let's just zoom in a little more and add a human angle to this particular discussion. Pakistan has started sending Afghan refugees back. Why do you think this is happening after decades of Pakistan hosting one of the largest refugee populations in the world?
Well, I believe the deportations are driven by Pakistan's domestic political pressures, economic challenges, security fears related to TTP, and Islamabad's frustration with Kabul. But the
Mhm.
approach is harmful and unfair. These refugees did not create terrorism in Pakistan. Many have lived in Pakistan for 40 plus years. They contributed to the economy, culture, and labor force in Pakistan. Mass deportations damage Pakistan's moral standing, destabilize Afghan families, and create new humanitarian crises.
What is the future of these refugees back in their homeland?
Well, to be honest, the future is uncertain and worrying. Afghanistan's economy cannot absorb large numbers quickly. Many deported families have no homes, no jobs, and no support networks. The international community must step in, and Pakistan should allow a phased, humane approach rather than mass expulsions. If handled badly,
Mhm.
refugee suffering will fuel resentment on both sides, harming long term relations.
Is there any chance of Afghanistan and Pakistan cooperating in the future?
I believe yes, but only if the foundation changes. Cooperation
Mhm.
is possible if Pakistan stops viewing Afghanistan as a strategic asset. The Durand line issue is handled legally, respectfully, and not through force. And trade is depoliticized. Security dialogues become equal, not one sided. Beside that, refugees are treated with dignity. Pakistan acknowledges its past mistakes, and Afghanistan acknowledges Pakistan's sacrifices too. Mutual respect, not dominance, is the only path. A stable partnership benefits both nations economically, politically, and socially. I'd like to add that we should not forget that Afghanistan and Pakistan are neighbors forever. We can change this reality that we have. That's the ground reality. We can either share stability or share instability. The choice must be guided by wisdom, not suspicion, by respect, not interference, and by humanity, not pressure.
Thank you so much for your wonderful insights, Hamdullah Hamdard, and for sharing this space with me. If you want more on these discussion or more on similar topics, subscribe to Hamdard Speaks.
Thank you for having me, Remshay.